Okay, good day everyone. Since we are unable to meet for our regular class, I have prepared this recorded lecture to continue our discussion of anatomy and physiology. So for this lecture, we will focus on the cell beginning with its major parts and continuing through the different mechanisms of membrane transport, cellular organelles, gene expression, cell division, and finally cellular aging. As nursing students, well, I want you to remember that learning the cell is not simply about memorizing the names of organelles. Many things that you will encounter in nursing, such as IV fluid administration, electrolyte imbalance, diabetes, cancer, wound healing, infection, and the effects of aging, can ultimately be understood by looking at what is happening at the cellular level. So as we go through the slides, always ask yourself, what is happening to the cell and why does this matter to my patient? Okay, so let's begin with the basic structure of the cell. So as shown in the illustration, the cell can be divided into three major parts. First is the plasma membrane, sometimes called the cell membrane. Second is the cytoplasm, which includes now the cytosol and the different organelles. And third is the nucleus, which contains chromosomes and genes. So you may think of these three parts in a simple way. The plasma membrane forms now the boundary of the cell and regulates interaction with the environment. So the cytoplasm contains the structure where many cellular activities occur, and the nucleus contains the genetic information that directs now the activities of the cell. So look carefully at the illustration. Notice that a cell is not simply an empty structure. It contains many specialized components working together. So for nursing, this is an important idea because disease may begin when one or more of these cellular components fail to function normally. For example, abnormalities involving now the cell membrane may affect electrolyte movement. Abnormalities in mitochondria may affect energy production, and abnormalities involving now the nucleus and genes may contribute to uncontrolled cell division. So throughout this lesson, we will repeatedly connect these structures to actual conditions you may encounter in patient care. So we will begin then with the first major part of the cell, and that is now the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane is described as a flexible yet sturdy barrier that surrounds and contains the cytoplasm. So the word barrier is very important, but we should not think of the membrane as a solid wall. Instead, it is highly organized structure that controls communication between the cell's interior and its external environment. Substances such as oxygen, glucose, sodium, potassium, water, hormones, and medications may interact with or cross the membrane in different ways. So for nurses, membrane function is especially important in managing fluid balance, electrolyte abnormalities, drug actions, glucose regulation, and nerve impulses. So the plasma membrane is not just a covering, it is one of the major structures responsible for maintaining the cell's internal environment. Okay, so on this slide, we see two major types of membrane proteins. So these are integral proteins and peripheral proteins. Integral proteins are embedded within the membrane. Some of them span the membrane, which is why they are also called transmembrane proteins. So peripheral proteins are associated mainly with the inner or outer surface of the membrane. So why are these proteins important? Substances often cannot simply move through the lipid portion of the membrane. Some need channels, carriers, or receptors provided by these proteins. So in nursing and medicine, many drugs work by interacting with these membrane proteins. Later, for example, we will see that local anesthetics can affect sodium channels and insulin influences glucose transport. So when you hear the term membrane protein, think of it as a structure that can help the cell transport substances, receive signals, and communicate. So this slide shows that membrane proteins perform several different functions. Some function as ion channels, others act as carriers or transporters. Some function as receptors that bind specific molecules. So other functions as enzymes, linkers, or cell identity markers. So think of the membrane as a busy hospital entrance. Not everyone could enter through the same door. Some substances move through channels. Some require carriers. Some molecules do not enter at all but bind to receptors and send a message into the cell. So this is clinically important because many hormones and medications act through receptors located on cell membranes. So a change in the structure of number of membrane proteins may significantly affect how a cell responds now to substances in the body. Okay, so looking into the concept of membrane fluidity, our plasma membrane is not rigid. It is described as a fluid structure because many lipids and proteins can move within the bilayer. So this fluidity then allows the membrane to adjust its shape and perform various functions. So cholesterol, for example, okay, so cholesterol helps stabilize now the membrane and helps regulate membrane fluidity. So even though we commonly associate cholesterol with cardiovascular disease, cholesterol itself is also a normal and important component of cellular membranes. So the clinical concern is not simply the presence of cholesterol, but abnormal cholesterol levels and how cholesterol is transported and deposited in the body. Another major property of plasma membrane is selective permeability. That's why it is called semi-permeable membrane. So selective permeability means that the membrane allows some substances to cross more easily than others. So small nonpolar uncharged molecules can pass through the lipid bilayers relatively easily. Other substances require transmembrane proteins acting as channels or transporters. Large macromolecules generally require vesicular transport. So think of these as a cellular security. The cell cannot simply allow every substance to enter or leave freely. So it must regulate its internal environment. So for nurses, this principle helps explain why certain medication cross membranes readily while others require transport proteins, and why electrolyte concentrations can differ markedly inside and outside the cell. Okay, so as we continue and before discussing membrane transport, we need to understand the term gradient. A concentration gradient refers to a difference in the concentration of a substance between one side of the membrane and the other. So an electrical gradient involves differences in the concentration of charged particles across the membrane. So together, these contribute to an electrochemical gradient. So these gradients now are extremely important because they influence how ions such as sodium, potassium, calcium, and chloride move. Okay, so later in anatomy and physiology, you will see these same concepts again when we discuss nerve impulses, um, muscle contraction, and cardiac function. So this slide provides now a foundation for many future nursing related topics. Okay, so there are two broad categories of transport across the plasma membrane. The first is passive transport. Passive transport does not directly require ATP, and substances generally move from an area of higher concentration to one of lower concentration. Examples of these would be simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis. The second is active transport. Active transport requires no energy and can move substances against their concentration gradient. So this includes active transport using membrane proteins and transport involving vesicles. So for your review, remember this basic function or distinction rather. Passive, no direct ATP requirement, usually from high to low. Active energy required may move substances against now the gradient. Okay, so let's talk about passive transport, simple diffusion. So the first passive transport mechanism is simple diffusion. Diffusion is influenced by several factors. So these include the steepness now of the concentration gradient, temperature, the mass of the diffusing substance, surface area, and diffusion distance. So small nonpolar molecules such as oxygen and carbon dioxide can move by simple diffusion. So some lipid-soluble molecules can also cross in this way. An easy way to remember diffusion is that particles tend to move from where they are more concentrated toward where they are less concentrated. And please do not forget that no ATP is directly required. Okay, so this slide is particularly important because it directly connects diffusion to nursing, okay, or nursing practice or its nursing relevance. Okay, so first consider the concentration gradient. Oxygen moves from the alveoli, where oxygen concentration is relatively high, into pulmonary capillary blood, where it is lower. Okay, so you have here from the factor steepness of the concentration gradient. Okay, so when oxygen therapy increases inspired oxygen concentration, the concentration gradient can widen, okay, promoting oxygen movement. Okay, so that would be for the steepness now of the concentration gradient. Now, let's talk about the surface area. Okay, so healthy lungs provide a large alveolar surface for gas exchange. If alveoli collapse, as in atelectasis, surface area decreases. Okay, so this is one reason why patients may be encouraged, okay, to perform deep breathing exercises after surgery. Another is we have the diffusion distance. A thin respiratory membrane allows oxygen to cross efficiently. If fluid accumulates, as may occur in pulmonary edema or pneumonia, the diffusion distance increases. So that can impair oxygenation. Therefore, when you monitor a patient's respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, breathing pattern, or signs of hypoxia, you are observing the clinical consequences actually of basic diffusion principles. So for facilitated diffusion, and this is more on channel mediated actually. Okay, this is slide eventually for channel mediated facilitated diffusion. So some substances cannot easily cross the lipid bilayer, so they require help from membrane proteins. So this passive process is called and facilitated diffusion. So on this particular slide, we do focus on channel mediated diffusion as highlighted actually in the slide. So a channel protein forms now a pore through which particular ions or water may pass. Okay, examples includes channels for sodium, potassium, and chloride. So even if a protein helps the substance cross, the substance still moves down its gradient. So ATP is not directly required. So this becomes extremely important when we study neurons because ion channels allow the movement now of sodium and potassium during electrical signaling. So the second type is carrier-mediated facilitated diffusion. Okay, so as highlighted in the slide. Instead of passing through an open pore, a molecule binds to a specific carrier protein. So the carrier changes now shape and moves the substance across the membrane. So a major example for this is the transport now of glucose. Okay, a useful distinction is that channel substances passes through a pore while carrier substance now binds the protein changes shape, then the substance is released. So both are forms of facilitated diffusions when movement occurs down the concentration gradient. So this particular slide or table summarizes now the major differences. So for channel proteins form pathways through the membrane rather and commonly transport ions such as sodium, potassium, and chloride or water through aquaporins. Okay, so the carrier proteins bind specific Okay, carrier proteins now bind specific substances such as glucose or amino acids. So channel mediated transport can be extremely rapid. Carrier mediated transport is generally slower because the protein must bind the substance and change shape. So this particular slide also gives two important clinical examples. We have the local anesthetics can affect sodium channels. Okay, and insulin is associated with increased availability of glucose transporters. So we will discuss this in the next stage for you to understand better. Okay, to understand better the previous slide, so we have here a very good nursing application. So local anesthetics such as Licodeine can enter a nerve, okay, and block voltage-gated sodium channels. So if sodium entry is blocked, normal depolarization cannot occur. So without proper depolarization, an action potential cannot be effectively generated or propagated. So as a result, pain signals are prevented from reaching now the brain in the usual way. So the area becomes temporarily numb. So from a nursing perspective, this slide now emphasizes several responsibilities. So assessing now the patient for previous allergies or adverse reactions, administer within appropriate dosage limit, then monitor for signs of toxicity such as perioral numbness, tinnitus, or a metallic taste. And teach the patient now to protect the numb area from injury until sensation returns. So here we see a direct connection. So from membrane channel, okay, nerve impulse, medication action, and then nursing monitoring. Okay, so now we look at carrier-mediated transport involving glucose. So insulin binds to receptors on muscle and fat cells. So this triggers now the GLUT4 transporters. Take note of the word transporters. Okay, to move toward the plasma membrane. So the GLUT4 then allows glucose to enter the cell along its concentration gradient. The glucose can be used for energy or stored as glycogen. So as more glucose moves from the blood into the cells, blood glucose levels decrease For nursing practice, this explains why blood glucose should be checked when appropriate before insulin administration and why patients must be monitored for hypoglycemia. So this particular slide also reminds us of injection site rotation and potassium monitoring when IV insulin is used to manage hyperkalemia. So again, the cellular mechanism helps us understand the nursing intervention. And another type of passive transport is osmosis. So osmosis involves now the movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane. So water movement is influenced by differences in solute concentration. So for nursing students like you, osmosis is one of the most clinically important cellular concept because it helps us understand, or it helps you understand the effects of different IV solution. So as we proceed to the next slide, we focus on one question. Where will the water move? Okay, so with the question a while ago, where will the water move? Okay, so you have here now the concept of tonicity to answer that particular question. So tonicity describes how a solution influences now the volume or shape of body cells. We commonly describe solution as isotonic, hypotonic, or hypertonic. So look at the red blood cells shown in the illustration. Notice that the cell remains normal under one condition, swells under another, and shrinks under the third condition. So these changes occur because of water movement. So this concept is particularly important in nursing because the type of fluid surrounding the cell can affect now the cellular hydration. Okay, so let's compare the three. In an isotonic solution, solute concentration now inside and outside the cell is balanced enough that there is no significant net change in cell volume. Okay, so the red blood cell retains its normal shape. Okay, so in this particular slide, it gives a 0.9% sodium chloride or normal saline as an example. So hopefully that you will perform this in the laboratory. Okay, so in a hypotonic solution, the environment has a lower solute concentration than the inside of the cell. Okay, so water moves into the cell. The cell swells and may eventually undergo hemolysis. And in an hypertonic solution, the surrounding solution contains higher solute concentration. Water moves out of the cell, so the cell shrinks or becomes crenated. Okay, so for a review, hypotonic, water moves into cells. Hypertonic, water moves out of cells, while isotonic, no major net change in cell volume. So as future nurses, never think of IV fluids as simply water being given to the patient. Different solutions can influence fluid distribution differently. Okay, so this particular slide gives you a clinical application of osmosis. So imagine that the brain cell contain excess water and are swollen. So because the skull is a closed space, increasing now swelling can increase intracranial pressure. So the example on the slide uses, on this particular scenario, uses 3% saline, a hypertonic solution. So the higher salt concentration now in the blood promotes movement of water out of swollen brain cells and toward the extracellular fluid. So as the cells lose excess water, swelling can decrease. So the nursing responsibilities identified in this particular scenario includes monitoring now the patient's level of alertness, pupils blood pressure, serum sodium, and fluid balance. So this is a very good example of why nurses must understand osmosis. You are not simply administering a fluid. You are influencing now the movement of water between body compartments. Okay, so this particular slide shows the opposite situation. Okay, here the patient has lost more water than salt and the blood sodium level is high. So the cells have become dehydrated. Okay, so in the example here is 0.45% saline, which is relatively hypotonic. So water can move from the extracellular fluid toward the dehydrated cells. The cells become better hydrated. So the nursing emphasis on this slide is particularly important. Correction should occur carefully. Okay, so monitor sodium levels, observe respiratory status, record fluid intake and output, and monitor for signs of excess fluid accumulation. So again, understanding tonicity tells us what may happen to the cells during fluid therapy. So moving on now to active transport. So primary active transport directly uses energy from ATP. Okay, so that energy changes the shape of a transporter protein so that it can pump a substance across the membrane against its concentration gradient. One of the most important example is the sodium potassium pump. This transporter helps maintain the very different concentrations now of sodium and potassium inside and outside the cell. So you will repeatedly encounter this pump when studying nerves, muscles, cardiac physiology, and electrolyte disorders. Okay, to illustrate further active transport, primary active transport. So we have here our first clinical application, which is digoxin therapy. Digoxin actually affects the sodium pumped ATPase in cardiac muscle cells. Okay, so when the sodium potassium pump is inhibited, sodium begins now to accumulate inside the cardiac muscle or cardiac cell rather. So this influences another transporter, the sodium calcium exchanger. So as a result, less calcium is removed from the cardiac cell and more calcium remains inside. So why does that matter? Because calcium plays now an important role in muscle contraction. Okay, so more available intracellular calcium can contribute now to a stronger cardiac contraction. And for you to understand better, let's compare the normal situation with what happens when digoxin is present. So normally, the sodium-potassium pump uses ATP to move sodium out of the cell and potassium into the cell. So this helps maintain a low sodium concentration inside the cell. So the sodium-calcium exchanger then uses the sodium gradient to help move calcium out. With digoxin, the sodium-potassium pump is inhibited. So sodium begins now to accumulate inside the cardiac cell. Because the sodium gradient has changed, the sodium-calcium exchanger becomes less effective at removing calcium. Therefore, more calcium remains inside the cardiac muscle cell. Okay, so this particular slide summarizes the mechanism. So digoxin affects the sodium-potassium pump that changes sodium movement. Okay, so we mentioned that a while ago. So changes now in sodium affect calcium movement. So more calcium remains available within the cardiac cell. And because calcium is important, as mentioned a while ago in muscle contraction, cardiac contraction becomes stronger. Okay, so for nursing students like you, don't just simply memorize this simply as digoxin makes the heart beat stronger. understand the cellular reason. Okay, and this is sodium potassium pump. Okay, then we have sodium gradient, and then calcium movement, and then calcium contraction, or cardiac contraction rather. So this will help you understand drug action much more deeply when you study, well, part of pharmacology. So another example is actually hyperkalemia. Okay, hyperkalemia means that the potassium concentration in the blood is elevated. So this particular slide notes that severe hyperkalemia may be managed with insulin and glucose. Okay, so insulin promotes the movement of potassium from extracellular fluid into cells. So partly by stimulating sodium potassium pump activity. So this decreases now potassium concentration in the blood relatively quickly. The glucose is administered with insulin to reduce the risk of hypoglycemia. So why is hyperkalemia clinically important? So abnormal potassium concentration can disturb cardiac electrical activity. That's why potassium abnormalities require a careful monitoring. Okay, so actually this particular slide now reinforces the sodium potassium pump. Okay, so the pump the pump uses ATP. Okay, for every cycle, it moves 3 sodium ions out of the cell and 2 potassium ions enter the cell. So remember that 3 sodium ions out, 2 potassium ions in. So this helps keep sodium concentration relatively higher outside cells and potassium concentration relatively higher inside the cell. So in hyperkalemia, one therapeutic goal may be to temporarily shift potassium from the blood into the cell. Okay, so the management example continues. Insulin stimulates cells to take in potassium. So this promotes now movement of potassium into cells, reducing now the potassium concentration in the blood. Okay, so because insulin also reduces blood glucose, glucose is administered together with it to help prevent hypoglycemia. So in nursing practice, this is why patients receive insulin for hyperkalemia require close blood glucose monitoring. The drug is being used here not primarily to treat diabetes, but to temporarily shift potassium. Another management of hyperkalemia, we have here now the beta 2 agonists such as salbutamol. Okay, so giving now beta 2 agonist like salbutamol may also promote potassium influx into cells. So also we have calcium gluconate, however, does something different. It does not remove potassium, nor does it significantly shift it into cells. Its purpose in this context is to help stabilize. Take note of that. Stabilize the heart while the hyperkalemia is being treated. Other treatments such as diuretics or dialysis actually help remove potassium from the body. So this distinction is important. Some interventions shift potassium, others protect the heart, others remove potassium from the body. So for nurses, okay, knowing the purpose of each intervention helps you understand what outcome should be monitored. A secondary active transport does not directly use ATP at the transporter itself. Okay, instead it uses energy stored in an existing ion gradient, commonly a sodium gradient. There are two forms shown on the slide actually. We have the antiporters and the symporters. So antiporters move substance in opposite directions. For example, you have there the sodium. Okay, sodium may move into the cell while calcium moves out, while symporters move substances in the same direction. So example here, you have a sodium and glucose may move together into a cell. So the sodium gradient that powers many of this mechanism was originally created by primary active transport. So primary and secondary active transport are closely connected with each other. Okay, so for calcium overload cardiac function, this would now be a part of clinical relevance of secondary active transport. So the sodium calcium exchanger is an example of an antiporter. Okay, so in cardiac muscle cells, it helps remove calcium following contraction. If the sodium gradient becomes disrupted, calcium removal may be impaired. So calcium can then accumulate inside the cell. So this may influence now a cardiac contraction, but also contribute now to abnormal cardiac rhythms. So this particular slide connects this mechanism with cardiac glycosides such as digoxin. Okay, so the importance now of this one to nursing aspect is that disturbances in ion movement at the cellular level can eventually appear as changes in cardiac function and rhythm. Okay, so this slide introduces now the sodium glucose co-transporter or SGLT. So in the proximal tubules of the kidney, sodium glucose importers normally help reabsorb glucose from the filtrate. So in uncontrolled diabetes, blood glucose can become very high. Okay, so the transport system may become overwhelmed and excess glucose remains in the urine. So in the urine rather. So this is called glycosuria. So glucose in the urine also draws water with it via osmosis, contributing now to osmotic diuresis. So this can contribute now to dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. So when a patient with uncontrolled diabetes experiences excessive urination, we can trace part of the problem back to transport processes occurring now at the renal cellular level. Okay, so we now move to vesicular transport, and this is now receptor-mediated endocytosis. So the first example is receptor-mediated endocytosis. This process is very specific. A target molecule binds now to a particular receptor on the cell surface. The example shown in this particular slide is LDL cholesterol. Okay, so after binding, the membrane folds inward, forming now a vesicle. So the vesicle loses its coat and fuses now with endosome. So the receptors can be recycled back to the membrane. Okay, the LDL containing material may eventually reach lysosomes where it is broken down. So receptor-mediated endocytosis now allows a cell to selectively take up specific substances. Okay, so in this particular slide, you have a very detailed, okay, step-by-step uh, on how this LDL receptor-mediated endocytosis occurs. Okay, so I repeat, this slide explains now the LDL example step by step. So we have here now the process or the steps. We have number one, binding. So first is binding. So LDL binds to the specific receptors located in clathrin-coated regions of the membrane. So very specific yan. We have the clathrin-coated regions. So next, the membrane folds inward, forming now a vesicle, as mentioned a while ago in the previous slide, the vesicle then loses its coat and joins an endosome. So the LDL separates now from its receptor. So the LDL material can then reach a lysosome where it is broken down and cholesterol is released for cellular use. Okay, so this particular slide also introduces now a clinical connection. We have now this what we call familial hypercholesterolemia. So if LDL receptors are defective or absent, LDL cannot be taken up normally, and cholesterol may accumulate now in the body. So this contributes now to increased cardiovascular risk. Okay, so again, a disorder affecting now a single membrane receptor can eventually lead to a systemic disease. In layman's term, if we talk about LDL cholesterol, this is actually our bad, or this is what we call bad cholesterol. Okay, so I repeat, if LDL receptors are defective or absent, LDL cannot be taken up normally, and cholesterol may accumulate in the blood. That's why this contributes now to increase cardiovascular risk. Okay, then we have phagocytosis. Another form of vesicular transport is phagocytosis, or described as cell eating. So white blood cells such as neutrophils and macrophages use this process to engulf particles such as bacteria. So the cell detects and binds the particle. A vesicle called a phagosome forms. The phagosome then fuses with the lysosome. Then digestive enzymes break down the engulfed material. So this process is directly related now to immune defense and infection. So when you observe inflammation, monitor a patient with a bacterial infection, or interpret a related white blood cell count, remember that immune cells perform processes such as phagocytosis at the cellular level. And we have pinocytosis. Okay, pinocytosis is sometimes called cell drinking. Unlike receptor-mediated endocytosis, it is relatively nonspecific. The plasma membrane folds inward, trapping extracellular fluid and dissolved substances. A small vesicle forms and moves into the cell. The contents may eventually be processed and used. Okay, so this slide connects now the mechanism with this mechanism with kidney tubular cells. So impaired handling of small molecules can contribute now to a loss of proteins or nutrients in the urine. So even this microscopic process can have a consequence that become detectable in clinical laboratory results. Now, we have exocytosis and transcytosis. So, exocytosis is essentially the movement of substance out of a cell through vesicles. The cell packages substances such as hormones, neurotransmitters, or enzymes into membrane-bound vesicles. So, the vesicles move toward the plasma membrane, fuses with it, and releases its content outside the cell. Okay, so one important example is the release now of neurotransmitters by nerve cells. Then we have transcytosis, on the other hand, involves transporting now a substance across a cell. It enters by endocytosis, crosses now the cell with a vesicle, and leaves by exocytosis. The example in this particular slide is the movement now of antibodies across intestinal cells in newborns. Okay, so now we move from the plasma membrane now into the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm includes the cytosol and the organelles. Okay, so the cytoplasm is the intracellular fluid portion. The organelles are specialized structures with specific functions. So think of the cytoplasm as the working area of the cell. Okay, so different organelles perform different responsibilities, but they do not work independently. Okay, they work as a team. So just as different hospital departments must coordinate. So cellular organism also work together to maintain the life of the cell. Okay, so let's talk about the cytoskeleton. The cytoskeleton is a network of protein filaments inside the cell. So it provides structural support rather, maintains cell shape and contributes now to movement. So there are three main components. So we have the microfilaments made primarily of actin. Okay, they help maintain shape and participate now in cell movement. Second is we have the intermediate filaments. So these provide mechanical strength and stability. Third, the microtubules. So these help move organelles, support cilia and flagella, and from the mitotic spindle during cell division. Okay, in connection now to nursing practice or nursing relevance, it becomes clearer in tissues exposed now to mechanical stress or cells that depend on movement. So problem affecting the cytoskeleton structures or cytoskeletal structures can interfere with normal cellular organization and function. Okay, so the centrosome is located near the nucleus and serves as an important microtubule organizing center. So it contains two centrioles arranged approximately at right angles. So each centriole contains organized microtubules. So one major function of the centrosome is organizing the spindle fibers during cell division. So this becomes particularly important when a cell prepares now to divide. So the centrosome also contributes cell shape and to the formation of structures such as cilia and flagella. Keep this structure in mind because we will be also encountering this, okay, in the mitotic spindle again when discussing mitosis. Now, the cilia and flagella contain organized microtubules. Cilia are short and usually numerous. They beat and coordinated movements. A major example is found in the respiratory tract where cilia help move mucus trapped particles away from the lower airways. So for nursing, this is a very useful clinical connection. Effective ciliary movement is one of the body's normal airway defense mechanisms. So when mucus clearance is impaired, secretions and microorganisms can more easily remain in the respiratory tract. So flagella are longer and usually fewer in number. In humans, the major example is the sperm cell, in which the flagellum provides motility. Now we have the ribosomes. Ribosomes are the cell's protein making machinery. Okay, they contain a large and a small subunit. The small subunit helps read messenger RNA. The large subunit helps join amino acids together to form a polypeptide. So there are two general locations. We have the free ribosomes, produce proteins mainly for use within the cell, while bound ribosomes attached now to the rough endoplasmic reticulum produce proteins that may be secreted or inserted into cellular membranes. So whenever you hear ribosomes, your first association should be protein synthesis. Okay, and remember that proteins include many different as well as important enzymes, receptors, structural proteins, and other molecules needed for normal body function. Okay, so the endoplasmic reticulum has two major forms. The rough endoplasmic reticulum, or RER, has ribosomes attached to it. So it is strongly associated with protein synthesis, folding, and modification. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum, or SER, does not contain ribosomes. It participates in lipid synthesis, carbohydrate metabolism, detoxification, and calcium storage. So in muscle cells, specialized smooth endoplasmic reticulum, called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, stores calcium. So this is very important because calcium is required for muscle contraction. So as a future nurses, when you eventually study skeletal and cardiac muscle, you have to remember that calcium storage and release depend partly on this specialized intracellular membrane system. Okay, so for Golgi complex or Golgi bodies, after many proteins are produced in the rough endoplasmic reticulum, they are transported now to the Golgi complex. Okay, think of the Golgi as the cell's processing and shipping center. So the cis phase receives materials. The medial region processes them, and the transphase sorts and packages the materials. So secretory vesicles then carry products to their destination. So example sequence now, or a simple sequence of this would be from rough endoplasmic reticulum to Golgi bodies, and then eventually modification, sorting, packaging, uh, and of course to its transportation now to its destination. The Golgi also contributes now to lysosome formation. So again, organelles work as a coordinated system. Okay. So the endomembrane system. So this coordination is called the endomembrane system. It is a network of organelles that synthesize, modify, package, and transport synthesis and lipids. The system includes structures such as the endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi complex, and various vesicles. The key message of this slide is and concept is that the cellular organelles are interconnected. A protein may begin in one location, may be and be modified in another, and packaged elsewhere, and eventually delivered to its correct destination. So if one part of that pathway is defective, normal cellular function can be also be affected. Okay, so this particular system is very important. Okay, so lysosomes are membrane-bound vesicles containing digestive enzymes. So they participate now in intracellular digestion. They can break down old organelles, substances taken into the cell, and various macromolecules. They also have an important role in defense. For example, after a macrophage engulfs bacteria through phagocytosis, the phagosome now can fuse with lysosome. The enzyme help destroy the bacteria. So lysosomes also allow cells to recycle useful building blocks. Okay, so for nursing, think of lysosomes as part of the cell's cleanup, recycling, and defense system. Peroxisomes and proteasomes also participate in cellular cleanup, but they have different roles. Okay, so peroxisomes contain enzymes involved in oxidative reactions. They help break down molecules such as lipids and participates now in detoxification, while proteasomes are structures that break down unnecessary, damaged, or faulty proteins. Okay, so a very useful distinction that you must have to remember: lysosome digests a variety of cellular materials. Peroxisome or peroxisome oxidative breakdown and detoxification, while proteasome destroys damaged or unwanted proteins. So proper cellular cleanup is important because accumulation of damaged molecules can interfere with normal cellular function. Okay, so the mitochondria are closely associated with ATP production. The outer membrane surrounds the organelle. So the inner membrane is folded into cristae. Okay, these folds provide now a large surface area for processes involved in energy production. So the matrix contains enzymes involved in the Krebs cycle as well as mitochondrial DNA and ribosomes. So mitochondria are particularly important in tissues that require large amounts of energy. So this particular slide notes that mitochondrial disorders may produce symptoms such as muscle weakness, fatigue, and neurologic problems. So this makes sense because muscles and nervous tissue have high energy demands. So when you hear mitochondria, remember ATP and energy production. The nucleus is often described as the control center of the cell. It stores genetic informations and direct cellular activities. Chromatin is DNA associated with proteins. The nucleolus produces now ribosomal RNA and participate in assembling ribosomal subunits. Okay, the nuclear envelope, it separates actually the nucleus from the cytoplasm, while the nuclear pores allow selected molecules such as RNA and proteins to move between nucleus and cytoplasm. So this particular slide also notes that abnormal nuclear appearance can be associated with cancer. In pathology, changes in nuclear shape, size, and chromatin characteristics can help identify abnormal cells. So the nucleus is not only important in genetics but can also provide diagnostic information. Okay, so let's talk about genes and chromosomes. So inside the nucleus, genes are arranged along chromosomes. A gene is a segment of DNA containing now information needed to produce a particular protein or functional RNA. So genes therefore provide biological instructions, but processing or rather possessing DNA is not enough. Okay, so the cell must be able to use the information contained in DNA. That brings us now to the next slide, which is gene expression. Okay, so gene expression is the process through which genetic information is used to produce functional products, particularly protein. So there are two major steps for our discussion. We have transcription and translation. Transcription occurs in the nucleus. DNA is used to produce messenger RNA. The messenger RNA then leaves the nucleus. And then here comes now translation. Translation occurs at ribosomes in the cytoplasm. The ribosome reads the messenger RNA and assembles amino acids into a protein. The simplest way to remember this is DNA, RNA, then protein. Okay, so a more detailed concept for transcription. So during transcription, the DNA double helix opens in the region containing now the gene. One DNA strand serves as the template. So an enzyme called RNA polymerase produces now a complementary RNA molecule. Okay, so the resulting messenger RNA contains now the genetic message that will eventually be translated into protein. So one important difference between DNA and RNA is that RNA contains uracil instead of thymine. So during RNA formation, DNA adenine pairs with the RNA uracil. Okay, so transcription occurs in the nucleus and produces RNA from DNA. Okay, so as mentioned a while ago, but this is a more detailed discussion for translation. So you have to remember that translation occurs at ribosomes. Okay, so the ribosome reads the messenger RNA, as mentioned also a while ago. Okay, messenger RNA sequence in groups of 3 nucleotides called the codons. So each codon corresponds now to a particular amino acid or signal. Transfer RNA or tRNA now then carries specific amino acids. So each tRNA has an anticodon that pairs with the corresponding messenger RNA codon. So the ribosome moves along now the mRNA and links amino acid together. So the growing chain eventually forms now a protein. So transcription, DNA to RNA. Translation, RNA to protein. So proteins produced through this process eventually contribute now to almost every cellular activity. Okay, so this is a DNA transcription and translation diagram. Okay, so for you to visualize it, this slide gives you a visual summary of the process we just previously discussed. Okay, for the last the last two slides actually. I mean the last two slides. Okay, so try to look at the upper portion first. We begin with DNA in the nucleus. Okay, so RNA is produced using one DNA strand as a template. So the RNA undergoes processing before mature mRNA is produced. The mature mRNA then moves out of the nucleus. Now look at the lower portion. Yan. So the mRNA associates now with the ribosome. The ribosome moves along the mRNA. The RNA molecules bring amino acids according to the codons being read, and those amino acids are joined to form now a growing protein. So rather than memorizing every detail in this illustration, immediately focus on the flow. DNA, transcription, RNA, mRNA, translation, and then the final product would be protein. Always. Okay, for transcription and translation, the final product would be protein. So for nursing, remember that proteins includes enzymes, receptors, transporters, antibodies, hormones, and many other molecules essential to normal physiology. So errors in gene expression can eventually influence cellular and body function. Okay, so moving on to another aspect now of the cell, and we have now the cell cycle. Okay, so for the cell cycle, interphase and cell division. So cells reproduce themselves through the cell cycle. Okay, so cell division is necessary for growth, tissue repair, reproduction, and maintenance. So our body continuously loses cells. Skin cells are shed. Cells may be damaged by injury. So some cells have limited lifespans. So new cells must therefore be produced. So this is why cell division is essential for processes such as growth and wound healing. But as we will later see, cell division must also be carefully controlled. Okay, so most of the cell cycle is spent in interphase. Interphase includes three phases, the G1, S, and G2. Okay, during G1, the cell grows, produces organelles, and begins centrosome replication. During the S phase, DNA is replicated, and the latter S can remind you of the synthesis now of DNA. So during G2, the cell continues to grow, produces proteins, and completes preparation now for division. So a simple memory guide for this, we have G1 or the growth phase 1 or just simply growth of the cell, and then we have now S, the synthesis stage or the synthesis phase. So that's the time now DNA will be synthesized, and then we have now G2 or the growth phase 2, and this is now the growth and preparation of the cell for division. Okay, so entering now the mitotic phase, the first major stage shown is prophase. During prophase, chromatin begins now to condense into visible chromosomes. So structures required for chromosome preparation begin to organize. Okay, so for your review, remember the sequence of mitosis using the sequence PMAT. So prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And we will take them each one separately. And during metaphase, the chromosomes line up at the middle of the cell. So this area called now the metaphase plate. So as an easy way to remember this is metaphase, of course, middle. So proper chromosome alignment is important to ensure that genetic material is distributed accurately now to the daughter cells. During anaphase, the sister chromatids separate. Okay, they move toward opposite poles of the cell. Okay, so in order for you to remember this, if it is anaphase, apart. Okay, so the genetic copies that were previously joined are now being separated into groups. So metaphase a while ago, it's the middle. Okay, anaphase, now they are apart. And then we have now the telophase. So during the telophase, the chromosome reach the opposite ends of the cell. The mitotic spindle disappears. Chromosomes begin now to return to their less condensed chromatin form. So new nuclear envelopes form around the two sets of chromosomes. You can think of telophase as the stage when two new nuclear are being re-established. Then after nuclear division, the cytoplasm must also divide, and this is called now cytokinesis. A cleavage furrow develops, gradually dividing now the cytoplasm. So when cytokinesis is complete, two daughter cells have been formed. These cells can then enter interphase. Okay, so in terms of nursing, again, remember that mitosis allows tissues to replace cells needed for growth, maintenance, and repair. For example, wound healing requires now the proliferation of cells to restore damaged tissue. Okay, so cell division must be carefully regulated. So this slide introduces now the P53 tumor suppressor protein. So P53 contributes now to the control of cell division. When normal regulatory mechanisms malfunction, abnormal cells may continue dividing when they should not. So this can contribute now to the development of cancer. Okay, so for nursing students, this is a very critical concept. Cancer is not simply rapid cell growth. At the cellular level, it involves disruption of the normal mechanism that controls cell division. Okay, so DNA integrity and cellular survival. So understanding normal mitosis gives you the foundation for understanding abnormal cell proliferation later. Okay, so this particular slide provides an overview of the entire somatic cell cycle. So take a moment to look at the table. It begins with interphase. We have G1, S, and G2. And then we move through the mitotic phase. We have prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And finally, we have now cytokinesis. So instead of memorizing these isolated definitions, understand the sequence. Okay, the cell first grows. Then it copies its DNA. It prepares for division. Then the chromosomes condense, they line up, they separate, new nuclei form, and finally the cell divides. Okay, so for nursing, the important message is that successful tissue repair requires this entire process to occur in an organized and controlled manner. Okay, so we now move from somatic cell division to reproductive cell division. So this is called meiosis. Under somatic, we call mitosis. Now for reproductive cell, it is called meiosis. Meiosis 1 is known as the reduction division. Its major purpose is to reduce the chromosome number by half. It also contributes now to genetic variation. Unlike mitosis, meiosis is associated with the production of reproductive cells. One important event occurring during meiosis is the interaction of homologous chromosomes, which can result now in genetic recombination. Errors during this process can contribute to chromosomal abnormalities. After meiosis 1 comes meiosis 2. During meiosis 2, sister chromatids separate. Okay, so the process eventually produces haploid cells containing one copy of each chromosome. The slide emphasizes now, or this particular slide emphasizes now an important distinction that meiosis 1 reduces chromosomes number, while meiosis 2 separates now the sister chromatids. Together, these divisions contribute now to the formation, okay, to the formation of genetically diverse reproductive cells. Okay, so this slide with this particular table just simply compares the two stages. Okay, so meiosis 1 begins with one diploid cell. The chromosome number is reduced by half. Then genetic variation can be introduced through processes such as crossing over and independent assortment. Okay, so the result is two haploid cells whose chromosomes are still duplicated. Okay, while meiosis 2 then separates now the sister chromatids. The final result is four genetically distinct haploid cells. The clinical relevance shown in this particular slide is especially important because errors in chromosome separation may result in non-disjunction. This may contribute now to conditions such as Down syndrome or trisomy 21, Turner syndrome, and Klinefelter syndrome or Klinefelter disease. So as nurse, understanding now the cellular basis of these conditions can help you connect genetics with prenatal care, okay, reproductive health, as well as patient education. Okay, so let's talk about sources of genetic variation. So why are siblings from the same parents genetically different? Okay, so I repeat the question. Why are siblings from the same parents genetically different? So several processes actually create genetic variation. The first is crossing over. Okay, so which occurs now during prophase 1 of meiosis. So homologous chromosomes exchange actually segments of DNA. Then followed by independent assortment, where homologous chromosome pairs are distributed randomly. Okay, we have also random fertilization. So any sperm cell may continue with an combine rather continue, may combine with an egg, creating now enormous genetic possibilities. Another variation or source of variation could be mutation, which is permanent change now in the DNA sequence. And then finally, we have the chromosomal rearrangement, such as deletions, duplications, inversions, and translocations can also produce variation. So this slide gives the Philadelphia chromosome in leukemia as an example of a chromosomal rearrangement. So this shows as the genetic changes may contribute not only to normal variation but also to disease. Okay, let's bring the two types of cell division together. So mitosis is primarily used for growth and repair. So there is one division. It produces two daughter cells. The daughter cells retain the diploid chromosome number and are generally genetically similar to the parent cell, while meiosis now produces the gametes or reproductive cells. Okay, so for mitosis, it is for the somatic cells, for meiosis for the reproductive cells. There are two divisions. Okay, so it produces four haploid cells. Genetic variation occurs through processes such as crossing over and independent assortment. So the clinical distinction is also important. Errors in mitotic regulation can contribute to cancer. Errors during meiosis can contribute now to chromosomal abnormalities or disorders. So do not simply memorize the number of cells produced, understand the biological purpose of each process. Okay, so for our final topic, aging and cells, okay, it or simply called cellular aging. So as we age, cellular efficiency gradually declines. Okay, so cells may become less effective at carrying out their normal functions and responding now to stress. The number of functional cells may also decrease because cellular division becomes slower while cell death continues. So changes also occur in the extracellular matrix. So materials such as collagen and elastin may gradually lose strength and integrity. So the slides or this particular slide introduces free radicals. These reactive molecules may damage important cellular structures, including DNA, proteins, and membranes. So for nursing, this helps explain why older adults may show changes in tissue strength, healing ability, and physiological reserve. So when caring for an older patient, remember that aging affects not only organs but also the cells and extracellular structures from which those organs are built. Now, our last slide identifies the several reactive molecules associated with oxidative cellular damage. This includes superoxide anion. We have also hydroxyl radicals, nitric oxide, peroxyl radicals, and hydrogen peroxide. Okay, so hydrogen peroxide is not technically a free radical, but it can contribute to the formation of highly reactive molecules. These substances may damage DNA, proteins, and cellular membranes. The body therefore has antioxidant defense mechanisms. So this particular slide includes enzymes such as superoxide dismutase. We also have catalase. Okay, and then we have glutathione peroxidase. Okay, so it also identifies antioxidant molecules such as vitamin C and vitamin E. So the main concept you should remember in this particular slide is balance. Okay, so reactive molecules are produced as part of normal biological processes, but excessive oxidative stress can damage the cells. So over time, accumulated cellular damage may contribute to aging and disease. So for nursing practice, this reinforces now the importance of understanding aging as a biological process involving changes occurring from the cellular level upward. Okay, so in summary, before we end our recorded lecture, I want you to see the cell as one interconnected system rather than a long list of structures to memorize. Okay, so the plasma membrane regulates what enters and leaves the cell. Membrane proteins provide channels, carriers, and receptors. So diffusion and osmosis explain the movement of gases and water. Active transport helps maintain important ion concentrations. Okay, vesicular transport allows cells to take in and release larger substances. And within the cytoplasm, various organelles perform specialized functions. Okay, so the ribosomes produce proteins, the endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi complex process and transport cellular products, while lysosomes, peroxisomes, and proteasomes participate in cellular cleanup and maintenance. The mitochondria produce much of the ATP required by the cell. So the nucleus stores genetic information. So through transcription and translation, that genetic information is converted into proteins. Through mitosis, cells support growth and maintenance and tissue repair. And through meiosis, reproductive cells are formed and genetic variation is generated. Okay, and finally, as we age, cellular efficiency changes and accumulated cellular damage contributes now to the aging process. So most importantly, I want you to connect these cellular processes with nursing practice. So when you administer an IV fluid, think of osmosis and tonicity. When you monitor oxygen saturation, think of diffusion. When insulin is administered, think of glucose transport. And when you monitor potassium levels, think of the sodium-potassium pump. When a patient receives a local anesthetic, think of sodium channels. When you care for a patient with an infection, think of phagocytosis and lysosomes. When you assess wound healing, think of mitosis. And when you care for a patient with cancer, think about what happens when cell cycle regulation is disrupted. And when caring for older adults, remember that many age-related changes begin at the cellular level. So as you study this lesson, do not limit yourself to asking, what does this structure do? Instead, begin asking, what will happen to the patient if this cellular structure or process does not function normally? That is why, or that is how, anatomy and physiology becomes meaningful to nursing practice. Please review your learning material together with this recorded lecture, particularly the diagrams and clinical examples. Okay, so at this point, I would like to thank everyone, and that concludes our discussion on the cell.